All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. We're going to give it just a couple more minutes to let some other folks get at it, but excited to speak with everyone this morning. It looks like we got a good crowd rolling in. I'll give it one more minute and we'll get started. All right, we'll go ahead and get things kicked off. Appreciate everyone's time attending the webinar this morning. Really wish we could all get together in person like previous years at the A4LE conference. We always enjoy spending time with all of our colleagues in the education sector. It's not in the cards this year, but we're all making the best out of it, and hope everyone is remaining safe and healthy and getting teed up and ready for the holidays here. My name is Brian Crutchfield. I'm with Timmons Group. I'm a civil engineer based in our Charlotte, North Carolina office that we specialize and do a lot of K-12 work. So excited to talk with everyone this morning about our subject, visibility, risk mitigation in school design. A little bit about Timmons Group first, for those of you who may not be familiar. We are a full service civil engineering, landscape architecture, and surveying firm. My background is in land development design, particularly in K-12 facilities. One thing that's a little unique to our company is we do have a dedicated staff of professionals that just work on K-12 facilities 24/7, really embedded into trends and different things that going on in the industry. So just wanted to be able to share some of that with some things that we're tracking, some things that we're seeing in the industry this morning. We also have specialists in water wastewater design, landscape architecture, pretty much anything site related that goes along with site design. Where we're located, we're about 700 employees now, mostly based in our 16 offices throughout the Mid-Atlantic and Southeast. As I mentioned, I'm based in our Charlotte, North Carolina office, and I oversee our operations in the Carolinas market. So very familiar with a lot of the folks that are on today's call. What are we going to talk about? So we've got our agenda's broken down into 4 topics, followed by some brief case studies. We're going to kind of go through each of these 4 elements: the defensible space theory, brief introduction and discussion about CEPTED. A lot of you are probably very familiar with the acronym, what it stands for, but we're going to dive in a little deeper in some of the elements as they relate to site design. And then we'll wrap up with talking a little bit about hostile landscape architecture, a little bit of a word that we came up with for some specific site design elements. And then, like I said, we'll go into some case studies. So we'll start off talking a little bit about the defensible space theory. Architect and city planner Oscar Newman was one of the earlier pioneers of crime prevention through urban design. He wrote a book entitled Defensible Space back in the early 1970s about his ideas related to crime prevention and neighborhood safety. He focused on a lot of elements related to social control, crime prevention, and public health. So there's been a lot of topics that date back even into the 60s, but really Oscar Newman was one of the first ones that really dove into some of the elements that we're going to talk about today. The defensible space theory book that he wrote contains a study from New York that pointed out that higher crime rate existed in high-rise apartment buildings than in lower-rise housing projects. This, he concluded, was because the residents really felt no control or personal responsibility or ownership for their surroundings because there were so many people around. He focused a lot of his ideas on social control, crime prevention, and public health along these realms because, you know, as you get more and more people into a confined space, they lose that ownership quality. Similar to, you know, if you were back in college and rented an apartment, you didn't have that necessarily ownership take on where you were living because you didn't have that ownership. Conversely, when you buy your first house, you have that ownership, and something really flips in your mind of, you know, I have ownership. I'm really going to take care of this. I'm really going to, you know, try to enhance it and protect it. So that's what a lot of his initial thoughts were about. And that was kind of the driver for what we now know today as CPTED. So he was really one of the earlier pioneers that really discussed how the built environment can influence crime prevention. So we're going to talk quickly about CPTED and how the defensible space theory was one of the precursors to what we now know as crime prevention through environmental design. There are a lot of publications out there about CPTED, but there's really no rigid manual or score sheet to follow like we would see in some of our other aspects, whether it's LEED or green buildings or anything like that. So it's more of a theory and more of a general understanding of how to design through this versus there being a rigid XYZ, you have to meet this to meet CPTED requirements. It's very similar to what we now consider as green engineering or even low impact design on the site side. It employs an overall strategy to achieve a certain outcome, which in this case is going to be decreased risk of crime on our school campuses. CPTED strategies really rely on the ability to influence offender decisions that precede criminal acts. So versus building a big wall or big fence around something to say, I want to keep the criminals out, we want to build an environment that in the criminal's mind that they perceive an increased risk of getting caught versus you know, the risk of the punishment that may come up after that. The CPTED research shows that the decision to offend is much more influenced by cues of the perceived risk of being caught than the effect of what the punishment could be from getting caught. The certainty of being caught, as I just mentioned, is the main deterrent for criminals, not necessarily the severity of the punishment. This graph shows that raising the certainty of being captured or caught doing a criminal activity also increases the deterrence for that criminal activity. So that's what we're really going to focus on in the built environment of how we can influence those items. So some of the CPTED elements that we'll go through on this, we'll review, we'll kind of break things down primarily about site design. So we're not going to get inside the building any to really talk about how CPTED applies to that, but we're going to talk about site elements and how our thought process goes through as we're either developing a new site for a school or as we're doing a building addition, renovation, and how we can bring some of those elements into the overall design, while not driving up cost and also creating a safer environment. I'm going to start with a little story about the town of Agloe. Not sure how many people know about this town, but it's in upstate New York. And the interesting thing is, it's not really a town, it's just a paper town. It was created by Otto Lindbergh and Ernest Alpers of General Drafting Company back in the 1930s. They basically took they developed road maps, or maps of the United States. And periodically they would put in fictitious towns such as the town of Agloe onto their maps as a way to deter copyright infringement. So they could always tell if they reviewed somebody else's map, if the town of Agloe showed up, they knew somebody was copying their maps. Once this got around in the industry, in the mapping industry, that was a real deterrent to anybody trying to copyright or basically copy somebody else's map on and recreate it that way. So interesting story that, it's not something that they went out and employed a whole force to go out and try to police this thing. They just did a subtle item such as creating a fictitious town as a deterrent for criminal activity, in this case, copyright infringement. So some of those subtle instances can also apply to our projects. So some of the CPTED site elements that we're going to talk about today are natural surveillance, natural access control, and natural territorial reinforcement. You're going to hear me use the word natural an awful lot because we're going to really emphasize on natural. We want to blend some of these elements into the overall site design so they don't stand out as being a really purposeful and a really in your face type element. So in the natural surveillance, it's generally around the topic of improving visibility of the potential offenders to the general public. Having that line of sight, being able to see people approaching from long distances out before they just appear on you. Those are some of the things that we look at very closely. Natural access control. Limit crime by differentiating public versus private space. So we're going to go through some examples of how we can add design elements into the site to control the activities and how people come, enter and exit campuses as well as buildings themselves. Then we're going to talk a little bit about natural territorial reinforcement by increasing the definition of space and approve the proprietary concern. So we've got a picture of a gate there that can show where that dividing line is between our territories, our spaces around our buildings. So starting with natural surveillance, we want to improve the visibility of potential offenders to the general public. We want to design streets to increase pedestrian and bicycle traffic. We want to place windows overlooking sidewalks and parking lots. Simple things such as leaving window shades open in the buildings. If we have a lot of glass and we orient the building correctly, we want to keep that natural light coming in the building, but we also want to be able to see out the building. If we don't orient the building right and we get a lot of glare or a lot of heavy sunlight in the morning, and we end up pulling shades, the use of that glass and the benefits of that glass go away really quickly. Using passing vehicular traffic as a surveillance asset, we're going to talk about that quite a bit and how we can orient buildings and different elements on sites in order to naturally have that surveillance from the general public, from law enforcement, where it can be easy for everyone to surveil a campus or areas of campus without having to be really purposeful about it. Using the shortest, least site limiting fence appropriate for the situation. In previous years, you may have seen, if we want to keep something protected, build a taller fence, build a more secure fence. That's not where things are at today. We want to keep things as low as possible, but still serve the function of containing either your interior operations or your exterior operations, but don't make them site limiting. Don't make them opaque. Don't make them where people can hide behind stuff. And using transparent weather vestibules at building entrances. I know a lot of architects, you know this very well. Having those entry vestibules are important, and they go very well with site design, where we can see the traffic that's coming in and out of the building as early as possible. So this particular site is an elementary school that we designed that shows a number of these elements. So we didn't just tuck the building back in some corner of a site. We've got access where the parent drop-off is on the right side of the building around a parking lot. We've got the bus loop that comes around the back of the building. So we've got access and visibility really 360 degrees around this building. We've got glass and windows. So we can see out to approaching either pedestrians coming up the sidewalk or see people approaching by cars. It allows us to spot specific any type of suspicious activity as early as possible before they get to the school or actually enter the school. Even having our access around back where we're going to have cars routinely coming in and out, this isn't just an unused dead end emergency access road. This is something that gets used daily by buses, by some of the staff as well. Similarly, if you reference inside the building, it's similar to this photo of a library where we don't really have any hidden spaces. It's wide open. You can surveil the entire area from pretty much standing up. We got low walls, and you can see activity that's going on throughout, and you can cover a wide area just with line of sight. That's what we're trying to create outside the building as well, is to avoid creating those blind spots and to be able to see as much as of an area as possible from one location. Contrast this to maybe when I grew up and went to school back in the old days, the libraries, they had really high bookshelves, had dead-end corridors, and we all know that bad things happen back in the corners of libraries where nobody can see, and really there's not much activity or foot traffic going around. That's where the bad things are happening. So current trends, we want to keep things as open and visible as possible, not just inside the building, but outside the building as well. We also want to design our sites to increase and encourage pedestrian and bicycle traffic. If we create those pathways, sidewalks, bike lanes, connecting to the public streets, they'll be more encouraged to be used on a daily basis. The more they're used on a daily basis, the more natural surveillance you're going to have on a school site. We want to ensure the potential problem areas are well lit. So if we have areas that wide open parking lots or smaller parking lots around athletic fields, we want to make sure they're well lit. Both the pathways, the stairs, entrances and exits, children's play areas, rec areas and storage areas as well. We don't want to make them too bright that we're creating glares and blinding and shadows areas. So that soft, well-lit areas that no matter how people are approaching or leaving sites, that they're able to be identified early, and we don't give them easy places to hide or avoid being seen. We want to place lighting along the pathways and other pedestrian use areas at proper heights. So we don't all have really tall light poles that are serving for pedestrian access. We may have some low-level bollard type lights that help illuminate faces of people. The more, which will make things a lot more or easy to identify the faces of potential attackers before they're approached. We also want to create designs that provide natural surveillance by passerbys, especially in the proximity of designated points of entry and opportunistic points of entry. So this is an example of a drop-off loop with more or less a courtyard approach. We've got a lot of glass in our admin areas that look out to these areas, a lot of sidewalks that direct people to the main point of entry. And it really gives you a great line of sight outside this area to anybody that's parking in the main parking lot or anybody that's pulling up to the drop off. You can identify them, you can see them early. And we don't have a lot of, there's no walls, there's no really hedges or bushes that would obstruct view, from all these classroom windows all the way around. We've got some soft, subtle landscaping, but we don't have areas that people could hide around these buildings. Before they get to this front door, we're going to be able to see them a long ways away, prepare for them, and understand if there's a threat or if there's not a threat. So natural access control limits the activity or opportunity for crime by taking steps to clearly differentiate between public space and private space. This is done by selectively placing entrances and exits, fencing, lighting, and landscape to limit access or control flow. And really natural access control occurs during that period. We want to use a single clearly identifiable point of entry. There's nothing more frustrating than when you arrive to a site via either a car drive up or on a bike or even as a pedestrian, and you can't really tell where you need to go to start with. We can handle a lot of that with signage, but really looking at the school and being able to identify that's the front door, that's where I'm going to have to go check in. That's a big help to directing that everyday foot traffic or everyday automobile traffic to the correct location. And it lowers the risk of, or it makes it easier to identify when there may be a potential threat versus a standard activity day to day. We can use structures to divert people to the reception areas, whether it's benches, different hardscape materials, sidewalks, of course, and then just general landscaping as well. Using low-level thorny bushes below ground level windows keeps people, away from the windows of some of these buildings. But keeping them low level, keeping them maintained is important because we don't want to create a situation where someone can hide. We've done a number of renovations on schools, and one of the complaints may be, well, we need some more sidewalks in these areas because people are just walking across the grass. There's shortcutting areas that wearing out my yard areas. Can we just put a sidewalk? And sometimes we'll come back and suggest, well, instead of putting in a sidewalk, what if we just put in a hedge of thorny bushes? That's a pretty good deterrent for people cutting across areas that if they don't want to get stuck or pricked by a bunch of holly bushes or some knockout roses or something like that, that'll be a deterrent for cutting across the grass. So sometimes we can use those, again, natural elements versus the expense and the negative benefits of more sidewalks, more ability to go different directions on the site. We can also use waist level picket type fencing along whether it's residential property lines or to separate activities on a school site. That encourages surveillance instead of using really tall opaque fences or back in the old days of chain link fence with slats in them. We don't use any of that stuff anymore. We like to use as low level fencing as possible because it allows us to see outside those fences, but also can create that controlled environment to know you're about to cross in an area that is controlled, that is monitored. Using a locking gate between those outdoor areas for safety and security. Again, we don't want to just invite the general public to come walk in off the street and come directly into a playground area or a courtyard area, but we want to create that physical barrier so they know you're not supposed to go past this point. So a lot of those elements can really help. Some of the previous practices were when we constructed courtyard areas or playground areas was to build a wall, that around it, where the theory was we didn't want somebody to be able to walk up and grab a child out of a playground, so we need to build that hard barrier. Now we want to be able to identify that threat and deter that threat long before they get up to the fence or the wall. Again, that perceived threat of being caught outweighs the punishment or the threat of punishment in this case. Another example, just like I talked about outdoor playgrounds, this metal fence reduces access by separating the public and private space, but it also allows bystanders that are both on the public side and on the private side to see any activity that's going on. You can even see out of some of the classroom windows, see through those playground areas, and be able to identify when somebody is approaching. If somebody is in that, approaching that area that shouldn't be there, it's a good way to really have that natural access and natural surveillance control. Natural territorial enforcement, reinforcement. We want to increase the definition of the space and improve proprietary concern. What that means is any type of maintained premises and landscaping, it really communicates to anyone that's approaching that this area is routinely looked after. There are people in this area. It's used quite often. There's going to be people walking through here on a regular basis. Contrast that with really dirty sidewalks, unkept shrubs, erosion along areas. That signals to people that nobody's really walked through here in a while. Nobody's looked at this. There's going to be a low risk of me engaging someone along this route. So maintenance is a very important aspect of CPTED. We want to restrict private activities to defined private areas. So if we're going to have a courtyard or an outdoor classroom space, we want to make sure we define those as private areas that we're not inviting the public to come up to and really discuss all and engage. Security system signage at access points, that can be a deterrent as well. That they know that they're being surveilled, or they know their cameras around. Is always a good deterrent. We mentioned previously avoiding chain link fencing and especially razor wire fence topping, as that really communicates the absence of a physical presence. So when you have those, jail or prison-like fences around sites, that's signaling to the public that either there's something really important in there that they're trying to protect, and I want to go figure out what that is, or it's a signal that this really, it's not like they have guards that are walking around here, or that this is policed very often. This is their single deterrent is this heavy-duty fencing that goes in this area. So again, we're looking for more of that natural element, that subtle element that's a deterrent versus those hard and cordoned off, fence it all, don't let anybody in, don't let anybody out ways of the past. Placing amenities throughout the site, such as seating or recreation areas in some of these common areas, it helps attract a larger number of intended users. So creating those purposeful spaces can be a real benefit to inviting the users of those spaces to actually use them. And it also signals to the public that this is a high utilized area. There's going to be people coming through here on a regular basis. This isn't a great place to hide or to hang out. That chances are somebody's going to be able to see me if I'm in that area. And then purposefully scheduling activities in those common spaces. It'll help ensure proper use. It attracts more people, and it creates that perception that the areas are controlled. So if you have outdoor classrooms, if you have courtyard areas, purposely schedule those activities. Encourage the faculty to take their classrooms out to use them regularly. That'll create that ownership aspect of that space, and will also help engage people to use them more often, as well as identify to the public that this is a well-used area. This is a defined area that that people are going to be active in, and creating functional lights at all entry points. Being able to clearly see somebody when they're getting ready to come in a door, especially at night if they're around athletic events. We need to make sure we're modeling that and understanding what that situation looks like, not just during the school day, but for after hours or after school events as well. Trees has been a topic of conversation as to when appropriate and when is it not appropriate. There's a balance between having enough landscaping to create that inviting feel, but not having so much landscaping that you create a lot of opportunities for people to hide and be not exceptionally visible when they're approaching buildings. When people take pride in the ownership of their area, with some soft landscaping, they're going to use it more, and they're going to go through greater measures to help protect that environment. In general, criminals don't want their job to be hard. If it was hard, they really wouldn't do it. So the more difficult it is for them to commit a crime, the less likely it is that they're going to commit a crime. So creating those warm, engaging spaces, inviting people to use them, will create that natural deterrent for crime activities. If you have just a bare open field and it's not well kept, it's not going to get used nearly as much. That's going to start inviting activity that you may not want long term. Some other CPTED elements, these are not physical aspects of design, so it's not really items that we're drawing on a plan set or that we're recommending to be implemented on a campus, but they can be just as important. And maintenance is we've hit on that a few times, but that's a big part of it. Deterioration indicates less control by the intended users and a greater tolerance for disorder. Many of you probably heard of the broken window theory. When you walk by a building and it's got a broken window, that signals to you that this isn't a building or a site that has a lot of activity, day-to-day activity. That if it's one broken window, there's probably going to invite activity for more broken windows. So understanding that the importance of maintenance in preventing or deterring crime. The maintenance is an expression of ownership of the property among its intended users. So again, that kind of pride and ownership, when you buy your first house, you have that pride of ownership. You want to take care of it. This is no different in our public facilities as well. A dilapidated chain link fence signals that the building is protected, is not very secure or maintained very often. We want to create that environment where it's from the outside, it's viewed as secure and safe and well kept, versus the fences falling down. It's been cut. People are creating the pig paths that are going through fencing to shortcut over to a playground or to a basketball court. We want to remove those signals to the public that we're going to, that this isn't an area that's cared for or policed naturally very often. Other CPTED elements, the activity support. Whenever we can create activity in specific areas, it increases the use of the built environment for safe activities, with the intent of increasing the risk of detection of undesirable activities. So more people that are there, it's going to naturally deter some of those activities, but it's also going to increase the chances of that bad activity being caught than if it's not used or not purposeful activities being planned around it. Signs for certain activities in the area show that users will be more involved in what's happening around them. So having banners, having signage that refer to activities that are upcoming can be helpful as a deterrent as well. Last on the list, you may have heard the term hostile architecture, but I'm going to call this section hostile landscape architecture because we're going to discuss some very subtle ways that site design can help deter criminal activity from approaching sites. But then and now, this is a somewhat unique example. This is a 19th century example of the use of landscape architecture to achieve social engineering. It's what's referred to as a urine deflector. So this is a church out in Europe that had problems back in the 19th century of people going in these corners and using the bathroom. So what do? They created these cornices in the corners as a somewhat natural deterrent for people using them for those purposes. They could have put a guard out there or fenced off this little alleyway to keep people out of there, but that wasn't the inviting aspect that they wanted. So rather than cordoning everything off or walling everything off, they just created something subtle as a hostile landscape architecture item to dissuade people from going to the bathroom in the corner. So simple, but very effective. And little items like that can be site adapted to, just like the reference I made earlier on, putting in some thorny bushes around to keep people from shortcutting across the grass. Subtle elements like that don't create that prison effect, but also create that deterrent that you're looking for. The modern form of this really developed into what we now know as CPTED, which is the crime prevention through environmental design. It's not walling everything off. It uses the three strategies we just covered: natural surveillance, natural access control, and territorial enforcement. Another way of enforcing this is, or using this to advantage, is to create curved driveways and parking lots. As engineers, sometimes we get very linear in our focus, and we want to put the least amount of curb and gutter and the least amount of asphalt on a site as we can to help control costs. But what that does is that, especially on a high school setting or even on any type of school setting, that really starts embracing the ability to speed through an area or use it as a drag strip through things. So creating those subtle elements of curves, the benefits of that to help control some of those activities, speeding and reckless driving especially, will certainly outweigh the minimal cost increase for additional materials. So we try to build some of those elements into our design, create those subtle curves just to make it as traffic calming measures, so we don't have to put speed humps every 100 feet or have a guard out there waving their finger at the parents when they're coming flying in right before they drop their kid off. So another subtle element that can achieve its purpose design. Another use are, for benches, half walls, and other features. You can affix these little notches here to deter skateboarding. That's just something, if we have that activity and you get a lot, weekends or during the summers, and you're getting some vandalism of people using those facilities, these are subtle little elements that aren't necessarily readily visible to the public in everyday activities, but it'll serve its intended purpose. It deters the activity that you may not want on the site. So small things, creating those barriers and just not making it easy for them to use things in its unintended fashion, or ways that we look to do things versus, like I said, putting a fence up around everything, locking a gate is not what everybody wants to do on a daily basis. This particular example, this shows, a courtyard. We don't have the low awnings, We're starting to remove a lot of those and go to more natural ways of shading and protecting from the outdoor elements to deter students from using them as vaping or smoking areas. We don't want to create those easily accessible areas where people can congregate in a corner and do not so good things. So creating that natural environment, inviting people to use it, but to use it in its intended fashion and not in a fashion that that's going to be unacceptable. So now I'll go through a few brief case studies on some school projects that we did and show how some of these elements were brought into our designs. Some of these examples are new schools, some are additions, and we purposely added those in to show that you don't have to start from scratch on everything to start employing some of these natural surveillance, natural direction, natural access elements. So this particular one is an elementary school addition. There's a public road along the bottom of the sheet here. There's a public road along the top part of the sheet. We did a building addition off the back, and what we used this opportunity for was really the back part of this site. Even though it had a public road, there was no real access into the rear of the site. So it kind of invited some activity that that the rear part of the site wasn't surveilled or policed or even visible on a regular basis. So we created another connection for our bus drive off of this back street to create a different entrance from our parent drop off and our parking lot. But it created this 360-degree surveillance. So we got a lot of windows in the new addition. We've got our rec fields in the back, and we've got easy ways for the public, either via our road in the back, sidewalks that we connected and bringing in to promote and encourage some of that pedestrian access into the site to help surveil and police some of these areas. We want to make it as easy as possible on a weekend or during the summer when the school's not being used as much for our police officers to not have to pull in a parking lot and drive down and park and then go look back in the fields and make sure nobody's up to no good. But we want them to be able to just stay on the public roads and be a visible deterrent to or visible to anybody that may be looking to do some not so great things. One of the trends that we've started to see is we're building less and less outdoor basketball courts on school sites these days because the theory is those invite maybe after hours or weekend activities where fights can break out, may get some vandalism, and you don't want them so close to the building that you invite some of that after hours activity. We've kind of pushed back and said you can still have those amenities in those spaces. You just need to put them in correct locations to where you can see them from a public road. When families are walking down the street, walking their dogs, they should be able to see what's going on in some of these playgrounds and some of these basketball courts. Don't just tuck it all the way in the very back of a site because that's the only place you could get it to fit. Make sure you can see it easily without having to purposely drive down a dead-end driveway and look to see if anything bad is going on. One of the balances we run into a lot is where you've got shared facilities between a school system and a park and rec. If there's a partnership between a county park and rec department, the tendency is we want to spend the least amount of money that we have to develop a site, so we keep it all the way to the front. We'll give all the property in the back. Maybe it's in the floodplain. Maybe it's in some bad soil areas. We'll give that to the county for parks and rec, which is fine, but we also have to keep in mind that we can't put them so far in the back that when those facilities get used after school hours, that they can be surveilled and they can be policed and that they're easily, you can view what's going on back there. So there's a time and a place for that, and there's a better way to site adapt it, but we always need to keep that in the front of our thoughts of don't just put the stuff that's not as important in the back, because it may not be that easy to see, and it may be inviting that activity that you're not looking for. This also shows a courtyard that we created that is for an outdoor learning space. You can see a lot of windows along this area. All these classrooms look out to it. We've got a low-level fence that you can see through. This clearly delineates the public versus the private space, but it allows people to easily see anyone that's approaching this from the outside well before they arrive there, both through windows, both through the space itself. Another example is the corner of this building, a lot of glass in the admin area, our main entrance. We've got really ways that we can see people that are approaching from the parking lot side. Really either way they're using this main entrance. We can see them well in advance before they get there. This line of sight even out to the public road is important to be able to see approaching traffic or identify a threat before they get into the building. This is another elementary school. This is a new build. Again, this has a public road that traverses along the left and top side of the building. We separated our bus loop from our traffic, but we created two separate entry points. And then we created this 360-degree with the building in the middle that you can see out to the rec fields, that you can see out to the bus loop, that you can see out to the parking lot, and really created that area of easy surveillance. We did, in the car loop, we created some traffic calming measures, during our straight sections to help slow down some activity. But we, have that really great visibility from our admin area out to our main drop-off point at our main entrance. And then again, our community fields, these are very visible from your parking lot and from your public roads around. So if there are activities that are taking place after school hours, a police officer won't have to come into the parking lot or come into this loop to really see what's going on back here. We want to create that line of sight which can be seen from a public road to know really what's going on back there. Here's your basketball court. Again, we didn't tuck it all the way in the back. We kept this in a place where you can see it from a public road, this line of sight, pretty easily. This is a high school site, an addition, where this one was kind of cordoned off previously and was a little tough to get around. We created a new addition to have a defined drop-off zone down at the bottom, created a bus loop on the right-hand side to really start connecting the dots of our 360-degree surveillance along the site. A lot of glass in the front from the admin area to be able to see out and be able to see a threat or anybody that's approaching very early on. So again, we were adapting an existing site that kind of had everything front and center to the building, but then now we're creating this element to where it's not as easy for people to go around behind a building and hide or approach from a direction that doesn't get as much traffic. Created some more parking along the north side of the building as well. Another example of middle school. This was another addition. We created a community. There's a road on the left side here, and then another one on the bottom of the page. We rearranged some fields to really have those kind of at your, so they could be very easily viewable or visible from your public roads. So after hours, summertime, when these fields may be getting used, even if they're used by the county or by the city, you can easily see what's going on these fields from any side of it. We also created, some additional, rearranged some parking and bus parking, and this building addition has a lot of glass in it, so you can easily see the approach and really create that destination. Here's your main point of entrance to the building. If you're if you're faculty, here's your drop off for buses. So there's no question of how to arrive at the building. So those are a few examples of some ways that we can both adapt sites to or adapt some of these septet elements in the sites. They're not terribly expensive. They just take some planning and forethought. We can't can't program the building, design the building, and then try to figure out how to make it all work on there. The two really need to talk together. So having that dynamic relationship with the design team, with the architect, with the owner, to understand how can we see the entrance, how can we arrive to that entrance, and how do we approach that entrance. Those two will really feed into one another. The landscape aspect, the hardscape aspect needs to tie seamlessly with the architectural aspect. Where they've got glass, where they've got windows, we need to make sure we're not creating an element that's gonna, outside of that window with walls, with landscaping, with other elements that are gonna block that line of sight. We wanna have shading and things like that, but we got to understand what the tree is going to look like if we plant one outside of a building. Is it going to block that line of sight to the areas that we want to police? So it's definitely a give and take. We like to get involved and really think through some of those things as early as possible to create or to avoid having hidden areas or areas of risk that could be a big drawback to the overall functionality of the site, or worse, be a burden on your law enforcement community and your operations group within your school district. Where last thing we want to do is to have to call up the police department and say, I need you to ride by this site every weekend and make this on your regular route because we think some bad things are going on in at the basketball courts that are tucked way behind a building. If we can design some of those elements so things are naturally surveilled by your local community, it's going to help have that, your community is going to have that ownership of the facility and really self-police it. The days of the community watch, this is a way of embracing that community watch, having some ownership, having some pride in your facility. So be happy to I've got the chat open if anybody has any questions. We got a few minutes left before we cut off, yeah, really appreciate the opportunity to present. Be happy to discuss with anyone offline as well. Any problems, ideas, solutions that you've come up with. We're always looking to improve our design aspects and really to influence to make really as school administrators and operations people make your jobs as easy as possible to operate and maintain these facilities. So don't see anything popping in the questions, but I'll leave my contact information up here a little while longer. Feel free to reach out to me anytime. Love to discuss some of your challenges or opportunities and see if we can help you. But thanks again for allowing me to speak, and look forward to seeing hopefully everyone in person next year, fingers crossed, and really get together and create some or continue some great dialogue, how we can improve our facilities throughout the Carolinas long term. So thanks again.